Tonight, my interview with the freedom fighter leading his country to democracy. Amid massive protests in the streets of Venezuela, Assembly leader Juan Guaido swears himself in as president of Venezuela to massive cheers from the people. Tonight, in his first American television interview, Juan Guaido, the man the United States and the rest of the free world recognizes as president of Venezuela, joins me now. Bienvenido, señor.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you. Thank you to your audience, and greetings.
Thank you. Tell me, what is happening right now in Venezuela? ¿Qué está pasando ahora en Venezuela?
Well, in Venezuela, we have a movement for freedom, for democracy, that has taken years of work and sacrifice to build, a majority through protests to win elections, to ally ourselves with the world that recognizes today the fight for democracy in Venezuela. And tomorrow we'll have a big protest, also on Saturday, in the National Parliament. We have passed the protection of assets in the case of PDVSA. There was an announcement by the United States as well that will no longer allow pillaging from Venezuela. We're talking about $700 billion in pillaging for the taxpayers' money. That's 4 times the GDP of Venezuela, in a country where annual inflation is 2 million%. We're talking about the debt that represents 53% of the GDP over 5 years. This is a movement that's very strong for freedom in Venezuela, where in Venezuela is mobilized, is aware that it can change very soon.
I spoke to President Trump this afternoon. He says he wants to help the people of Venezuela. All options are on the table. What do you need? Yo hablé con el presidente Trump esta tarde. Él dijo que quiere ayudar a la gente de Venezuela y que todas las opciones están en la mesa. ¿Qué necesita usted?
That's very important now. The people, the Venezuelan people that need medicine, food, that's at the center of our policy. The humanitarian aid passed and approved by the United States, the European Union, and other countries in the region. That was the first priority, humanitarian aid. Now Venezuelans live on $3 a month. That's a tragedy. That is impossible to survive under these conditions. That's the priority, that emergency. Then create spaces, and we have the support of the United States and President Trump to seize the usurpation of power, transitional government, and free elections, to restructure Venezuela, a country that needs prosperity. And once again, we need private property, private businesses, industry to generate and create jobs, to transform the society. The pressure that's been exercised supporting our democratic cause by the United States, Europe, Canada, that's been fundamental throughout this process.
Muy importante. Now, I know that Maduro says you're a criminal, sir. I know that your life is in danger. How are you preparing? Maduro está diciendo que tú eres un criminal. Yo sé que su vida está en peligro ahora. ¿Cómo se prepara usted?
Well, focused on our people, we have put our life at risk at the service of Venezuelans for a long time. We are a generation that, not because of age, but because of the momentum, the times that we had to live under a dictatorship. We saw how democracy was lost. We took it for granted in Venezuela, and unfortunately we lost it. Now we're in the process of recovering it. So we fear that our children are used to a subsidy, or that they will not be able to walk on the streets, that when they open the faucets they will not have water supply, to see that 40 people have been murdered, killed in the past week just for protest, and some of them are being tortured, and they're not able to see their parents. time, and some of them 12-year-old children that have been kidnapped just for protesting. We should not fear facing a dictatorship. Now we have appointed ambassadors to countries that have recognized us. Also, we're working on the PDVSA because throughout that company, the money of Venezuelans have been stolen, has been pillaged for many years.
In other words, you don't have any fear for your own life, though? Entonces, ¿no tiene usted miedo para su vida ahora?
Yes, they have threatened my physical integrity, my family's, and unfortunately, I'm not the only one. There's over 300 political prisoners. Juan Guaido, member of parliament, Fernando Albán, was murdered despite threats towards our integrity and our families. We remain cohesive and mobilized and united because this is our goal to rebuild Venezuela.
Hay mucho valor. Do you have the support of the military? Maduro says you don't. ¿Tiene usted el apoyo de las Fuerzas Armadas? Porque Maduro dice que no.
At the moment, there are over 160 officials arrested, 26 sergeants that are being sergeants, the counterintelligence military unit, because they showed discontentment for saying what's happening in Venezuela. 80% of the military family suffers from lack of enough funds, of money to have to buy food. 15% of the population have been forced to flee the country. There's not only discontentment, but also the willingness to change the situation in Venezuela, and I think that soon they will be on the side of the Constitution.
You said there are protests this week, tomorrow, and also on Saturday. ¿Usted dice que hay protestas esta semana?
Yes, tomorrow there will be today it was unprecedented of the protests and demonstrations where millions of people in 53 cities in Venezuela, 200 cities around the world. Wherever there's a Venezuelan national, there's a representative for democracy of our country. That is crucial, especially when we are facing a dictatorship that is naked in front of the world, and because Venezuelans know that this administration cannot solve the problems of Venezuela. We are always within the framework of the Venezuelan Constitution.
Tomorrow, the daughters of one of Maduro's American hostages will be on this program. What can you do to help them? Mañana tendremos familia de los presos en este programa. Las hijas de un preso americano. ¿Qué puede hacer? ¿Qué puede hacer usted para ayudarlos?
Well, we're going to achieve this very soon, the cease of the usurpation of national sovereignty. We're guaranteeing political prisoners, servicemen and civilians that will be on the side of democracy. In situations of transitions like Venezuela and Poland in 1958, these factors are necessary to gain the necessary support, but political prisoners are having a really hard time because they're suffering what's been, being jailed, not being able to express themselves freely. Throughout this suffering, we are working towards their liberty and their freedom.
Bien, la libertad. Turning to the history of your country, what happened under the Maduro and Chavez reigns? Ahora, un poco de la historia de Venezuela. ¿Qué pasó con Maduro y Chavez en Venezuela?
I'll give you an example, an economic example, socially and economic. Economically speaking, PDVSA, that was the third largest oil company in the world, invested $300 billion in its production to increase production, oil production. Only two countries invested more, Saudi Arabia and the United States. And these countries are producing almost 10 million barrels a day. Today, Venezuela produces $1 million. The production was decreased by 2/3. support. The fourth investment in the world. Money was stolen, was pillaged. That's why Venezuela today has no social services, no gas supply. They're cooking with a wood fire. They destroyed and ruined one of the most prosperous companies in the world that supports an oil-producing country. That's why the production of assets supported by the United States is very important, because pillaging cannot continue. We need to protect the industry to make it prosperous again. In a political sphere, they denied the opposition's legitimacy. They were behind, they were torturing, they jailed the opposition. Now we see children that are 12 years old that are behind bars. And then this is a company that does not respect private property. They expropriated, they stole properties, more than 5,000 acres of land. So we need to guarantee what's basic. 80% of food must be imported right now because they destroyed the farming industry in Venezuela.
You see, I know. How long will this transition take? ¿Cuánto tiempo tomará esta transición?
Well, we hope that will be as soon as possible. The pressure and the support of the United States is important, and all the other countries in the world that support us. We are sure that we are starting the change. This is the last chapter of change, the last chapter of a nightmare for many citizens that were forced to migrate, that were forced to leave their country, or that would lose their life because, for example, there was no power in a hospital, and the power plant did not work, so 17 people passed away because there was no power in a hospital. So we're waking up from that nightmare, and we're waking up to dream in a prosperous Venezuela in the future that will be prosperous and that will bring opportunities for all in the region. We hope that it will be possible. We're very close. We're taking a very important step, exercising government functions, appointing officials, appointing delegates, and hopefully that we will have the support of the armed forces soon to have free elections and bring Venezuela to prosperity again.
If Maduro leaves and you achieve success, will there be an election? Si Maduro se va y usted es exitoso en su plan, entonces habrán elecciones.
Yes, there will be elections, so that is crucial, that in the short term, our Constitution, Article 133 of our Constitution, mandates that the President of the National Assembly will take on the executive powers to call elections in the shortest period of time possible. Those elections will give stability to the country. We are just attending an emergency right now. We want to attract foreign investment. We want to participate in the oil industry, to have enough energy for the country and the region, and we want to definitely carry out a definite change in the country and the region.
¿Cómo está su familia? How is your family right now? Your wife, your daughter, su familia, su esposa, su niña?
We are very committed and very focused. They're working very hard for the future of Venezuela and their children, to paint a smile on our face when we talk about our youth. That's what we're building a future for our children. Nowadays, this is a huge motivation and this is unique. But like any family that is worried about the threats, etc., and the pressures, but we are focused on the development of our country.
Listen, it's not easy. He's been in hiding at various times. He's trying to evade that Maduro regime that I'm sure would like to lock him up because he's causing a lot of trouble for them right now. Coming up, more of my exclusive interview with Juan Guaido a little later in the show, his message to all the American politicians who are pushing their socialist agendas. But first, I know you will be talking with President Trump tomorrow. What do you want to say to him? Yo sé que usted hablará con el presidente Trump mañana. President Trump, ¿qué le quieres decir?
Mira, varios eventos. Además, hemos hablado con muchos presidentes de la región.
We have spoken to various presidents in the region, but I am certain that the concept of democracy by President Trump is very clear in the region. We saw democracy under threat in the country, in the region in Venezuela, and we lost it. We lost democracy. So it's very clear to us in the region the threat that is posed when a country can turn into a refuge and a refuge for terrorists. There is information that suggests that gold is stolen by some terrorist organizations to be sold, and also that is also linked to drug trafficking. So democracy for the region is crucial, and this is very clear to President Trump. That's how he has manifested it, and also we need to speak about democracy also with our neighbors, and very clearly so, and with decisiveness about democracy.
I think that's a message the president will be very interested in hearing. That was my exclusive interview with Juan Guaido, the man the United States of America recognizes as the president of Venezuela. He says he appreciates the international community's support. He appreciates the Trump administration's support. And there are more protests scheduled for tomorrow. I spoke earlier with President Trump today, who told me, and I quote, "All options are on the table." Joining me right now, Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. So, Congressman, what does it mean when the president says all options regarding Venezuela are on the table? Good to see you, by the way.
This is our hemisphere, Trish. We've got 225,000 Venezuelans living in my state of Florida. There are 2 million Venezuelans now living in Colombia. If we do not take action to stabilize Venezuela with our diplomatic efforts and potentially even military efforts for training and equipping missions so that there's not spillover of violence into other elements of Latin America, I think that's what the president means. But as you've highlighted on the show, the experiences of Venezuela show the failures of socialism. And I tend to agree with Sir Winston Churchill. Capitalism is the unequal distribution of resources. Socialism is the equal sharing of misery. And I think that that's what we see happening now in Venezuela.
You know, it's well put, and certainly an important thing to say right now as we look at the tragedy that's really unfolded there over the last nearly 20 years in Venezuela. I mean, capitalism is imperfect, right? And I know you're fighting for, and I talk a lot about the middle class feeling the squeeze, and it's not right, and there's got to be a better way. But I think the better way comes from better policies, from economic policies that encourage more growth so we can grow and we can grow and wages can go up. I mean, these are the things that will actually result in meaningful change. We should think very hard, for example, about our policy with China, which the president is doing. But to suddenly say, okay, there's no health insurance industry, private industry anymore, and we're just going to tax you all to death, I really worry, Congressman, for the future of our nation and for the nation that our children will be living in.
Yeah, socialism doesn't look like a charming new congresswoman from the Bronx. Socialism looks like not being able to find toilet paper in Venezuela. And, you know, the richness of that country is not something that is too distant in our memory. You know, in Florida, I remembered growing up in the 80s and 90s, Venezuelans were merchants. They were business people. They were proud of their country. And when you allow the country to be hollowed out by policies that empower the leaders rather than the people, the government rather than the individuals, then you lose the sense of ingenuity and innovation that allows any country to thrive. And so I'm very grateful that we've got an ambassador to the Organization of American States like Carlos Trujillo working closely with the Vice President and the President. Venezuela is on the minds of the senior leaders of our government, and that's a good thing because, look, if we got to be having troops somewhere, Trish, I'd sure rather stabilize our neighborhood here than be sending them over to Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan.
Monroe Doctrine, right? I mean, you know, if we're not there, we run the risk risk that the Russians are.
Well, the Iranians are already there. I mean, you know that the Iranians have made a substantial investment in the political infrastructure in Venezuela, and a massive civil war there could allow Iran to, Hezbollah backed by Iran. They're essentially, as you know, Iran's terrorism proxy. And so I think that we cannot look to Latin America as if we are the only potential player. If we are not influential, then some of the darkest forces on earth will use that as an opportunity to bring terror closer to America's shores.
Yeah, well, you know, look, regardless of what you think, right, about the administration, you can't help but feel for the people of Venezuela tonight. And I do think it's important that the president's paying attention to this, and the vice president's paying attention to this. I mean, he met with actually many of the people that have been on this show, many of the freedom fighters risking their lives or having risked their lives to fight for this opportunity. He met with them there at the White House today. Congressman, how does this end? How do we see that libertad for Venezuela?
We must establish some semblance of security within Venezuela. Otherwise, there's going to be a massive humanitarian and potential political crisis throughout Latin America, and it could threaten the entire hemisphere. And so this has to end with a recognized government with the confidence of the people.
Thank you, Matt Gaetz.